Hello, everyone. VNN, Brittany Harlow here. We are kicking off Kindred Spirits, Love and Heritage. I'm excited to bring back VNN Live for this event. So stay tuned. We're going to introduce our panel here in a second. I did want to give you guys an option and encourage you strongly to join this conversation. You can send me an email, bharlow@verifiednews.network. I'm going to be monitoring it throughout this event. And then, of course, you can drop a comment into the YouTube. I encourage you to just feel free to ask whatever you want, and we'll make sure to either get to it during the live stream or after the fact. Here is our beloved panel. We got Kelly Tidwell up in the top. He is our VNN, Verified News Network, President and CEO. And we have Tatianna Duncan in the upper right. She is one of the co-founders of Lucinda Hickory Research Institute. So again, gonna give everyone just a couple minutes or however 1 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves a little further. But again, my name is Brittany Harlow. Down in the bottom here, I am the director and lead journalist of Verified News Network and VNN Oklahoma, which is our newly launched news hub. There might be a little bit of a delay doing this broadcasting software, but hopefully we're coming through okay. This is actually really exciting for me too. This is the first time we've ever had a live panel streaming in this manner. So again, bear with us. And up in the corner, as I mentioned, Kelly, why don't you take a minute or two to tell everyone about how you became involved with VNN, especially as one of our co-founders.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on. Kelly Tidwell, President and CEO of Verified News Network. Brittany approached me back in 2017 timeframe with this concept of a grassroots movement for news, telling stories that were mostly untold by the mainstream news network, which really got me interested. Mainstream media is not at all diverse by any means. It's very, very one-sided. So that really spoke to me about why this is important. So she brought me on, kind of help spun things up. I handle the business side. I have no news background, but I've ran many companies in my past and a lot of analytics, and that's where my skill set is at here. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. We'll get back to you in a little bit. And Tatianna, why don't you tell us a little bit, a couple minutes about how Lucinda Hickory Research Institute came to be and when you guys started?
We started in February 2020, but the stories have been my whole life of hearing about the land and mysterious deaths. So when the opportunity came, one of the co-founders handed me a timeline of our family's history, and it was very difficult to read. That's where you feel a lot of, I guess, anxiousness, anxiety come in. But as I got deeper into the history, started doing my own research on my people, it was just very hard to comprehend it all. And it was far greater than I think what we thought, the land theft, how they were treated, and even the untimely deaths. So with all this information, it just had to go somewhere. I couldn't sleep at night. And the co-founder, Davey Colbert, suggested I start a nonprofit. And it's been a challenge for sure, because I've not done anything like that before. But yeah, and now we're trying to share the stories and help other Muskogee people and natives have a platform to share their stories. So yeah, that's how it got started.
So this has been kind of a lifetime in the making, especially, obviously many lifetimes in the making, but you guys spun up the nonprofit. What was it? Is it the beginning of the pandemic or?
Yeah, timing is not my thing, but you got to forge ahead. So yeah, February 2020, we're ready to go, and I was trying to plan all these fundraising events, and everybody's like, well, I don't know, there's that COVID. It's like, well, oh no. You want to not hear the negative stuff. But yeah, in March, everything shut down. So it gave me time though to understand, exactly what I was in for and learn a lot about nonprofits and get my team together and give us a chance to get on the same page, so to speak.
So I'm going to, in a couple minutes, get a little further into how me and Tatiana connected as far as this, our work together, detailing, talking about these untold stories, specifically dealing with allotment crime. But first, obviously, the title of this streaming event is called Kindred Spirits. And the idea to do something like this has been really kind of mulling around in my brain for the last few months because I grew up in Massachusetts. I moved to this part of the country probably about 10 years ago or so and kind of went back and forth between Oklahoma and Texas. But we are a Muskogee Creek citizen-owned news organization through my husband up there in the corner. For those who don't know out there, me and Kelly are married. So our romance and starting a family has coincided with VNN also coming into creation. But through my work, I have in journalism serving a variety of underrepresented communities and a lot of stories throughout Oklahoma that have gone untold. I have come into contact a lot with the sentiment of like, oh, well, why do you care so much? Like, why are you so concerned about the Native American perspective, this history here in Oklahoma? So I thought a lot about that myself and kind of how to explain the many different facets of why that is. And it kind of, to me, really dates back a couple hundreds of years in my own history. And so to kind of explain the first aspect of this Kindred Spirits angle, I'm going to throw up a good old slideshow here. This is my great-great-grandfather, Patrick Sweeney. And so he came over to America from Ireland, I want to say in 1890, and he was from the County Cork area of Ireland, which is the location was called Kilberry Wood. I don't believe that the area is still there, but that little community doesn't really exist anymore. And shout out to Oliver Slattery in Fermoy, County Cork, Ireland, Republic of Ireland, who has been, we found out, I met him when I went over to Ireland. We'll get into that in a minute, but he's been really instrumental with me finding a lot about my heritage. I am really into genealogy, and I've always been really interested in family histories, and especially my own family history. And so, like I mentioned, I went over to Ireland right before I met Kelly, actually, and just was walking around Fermoy and County Cork by myself, kind of looking for some insight into where my family was from. And I was just knocking on doors in a church parking lot, and I came across Oliver Slattery, who is so kind. And it turns out that our friends were families back in the 19th century, before my family came over to America. And so through this visit, it really inspired me to look even further into my history. And like I said, I came back, and it was not, I want to say it was maybe a couple months later that I met this guy, Kelly Tidwell, up on the screen. And so at the time, he was actually living in Oklahoma, and I was in Texas working as a weekend anchor and reporter for KXII in Sherman, Texas. But we met. Eventually, I helped him start researching his own history. And so that's his great grandmother there on the screen, Alice Thompson. And we'll kind of talk more about his heritage and what we've been able to learn through research. But it was during this time, as I said, working in news, that I really started kind of digging more into County Cork and my relatives there. And I came across the Kindred Spirits monument that was built in 2017. So if you're not familiar with the actual Kindred Spirits Irish Native American heritage, it dates back to 1847 when Choctaws gathered about $170, which is roughly, I want to say, $5,000 in today's money, to help the Irish during the Great Famine. And so, of course, that was a time where millions of people died during that potato blight. And so the Choctaw Nation citizens sent over that money to help them. And this was not long after the Native Americans were forced to Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma, on the Trail of Tears. And so you hear a lot of that history about the Trail of Tears. And but that obviously was just one of the many atrocities and crimes that was done unto the Native American peoples here in America. But the kindred spirits, like, not only that help, but it's just like the act of sending over money was such a big deal. But it was the just that shared heritage of colonial invaders coming and taking what is yours, and then leaving you to starve and to die. And that is what happened on the Trail of Tears with that forced removal, where so many people died. But also, not many years later, during the Great Famine, the Irish people were also suffering and dying, and their English colonial rulers were shipping out their agriculture instead of using it to feed them. And so that is a big mark against that crimes against humanity that was shared there. But eventually the Native American and the Irish people kept this care, this relationship, this brethren back and forth of being kindred spirits for years. So in 1990, the Choctaw leaders went to Ireland and participated in a famine walk. A couple years later, the Irish people came, visited the Choctaw Nation, and participated in the trek from Mississippi, commemorating the Trail of Tears. And then, of course, leading back to 2017, up to 2017, when the Kindred Spirits Monument was created and dedicated to the Choctaw Nation in County Cork. And so I felt like that was very interesting, in particular, because that is where my family was from, County Cork, in that area, lived in that area during the Great Famine. I came over to America not long after, but it's very likely that that gift of that financial gift to the people in County Cork that were dying likely benefited my own family before we came here to America. And so I always thought that was a very powerful thing to find out. And then, of course, I met this guy up there on the screen, as we mentioned, Kelly Tidwell, who is of Muskogee Creek and Cherokee descent. He is Muskogee Creek citizen. And again, that is why we co-own our organization, which is a Native American-owned news network. And so kind of fast forward a couple years, we had our son up there, Finnegan, and so it's very important to both of us to honor both of our shared heritage of Irish American heritage and Native American heritage. And there's so many different levels of the kindred spirits here. So of course now we work with Lucinda Hickory Research Institute. It's interesting. I'm going to throw you guys back up on the screen here after our slideshow has completed, kind of talking about the kindred spirits, history, and that aspect of our work. But I met Tatianna doing researching an abandoned cemetery, and she is like the expert on allotments and through her research that she's done. And I just thought it was even interesting. I want to say that was back in July or August. So it's been a few months.
Yeah. But we've done a lot in those few
For
months.
sure. And I thought that it was really interesting too, that I felt like the more we talk and the more we work together, how much we are kind of kindred spirits of the same like work that we're very passionate about, that ends up being like a lot of volunteer hours. It's very important, severely underfunded and not talked about. So have you ever felt that way, hearing me talk about working in news?
I feel that way. One thing for anybody who wants to start a nonprofit, you need to be willing to ask for the money. And that's something I've had to learn to do. I'm not super comfortable. The grant, writing is really a big part of it. But yeah, and then you have to be able to tell your story to get people to listen, because it's an important history, not just in Oklahoma, but in American history. And I don't mean to get political, but when we have a leadership that is so against tribe and tribal sovereignty, and they can be elected at another time, that tells me Oklahoma does not know their history. They do not know what happened to the American Indian, or they couldn't vote like that. They could not in good conscience vote like that. So, enough politics.
I want to believe you as far as, that people just, and I guess it's so hard for me, doing this work and to think that there is, that this history is still so unknown, that it's still, that people don't know about these allotment crimes, that they don't know that, what happened to people after they got here in Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears.
Sometimes, yeah. And of course, I like to say Muskogee people call that the road of misery or the road of suffering. And I don't remember how to say it in Creek. But yeah, as far as, I think even sometimes descendants of these crimes don't really fully understand. I know I didn't have the full scope until I got into the research. I can talk to other Native people and they can think, oh, well, my uncle got in trouble with the law and we had to sell our land to get him out of jail. I would look deeper. I don't think that's true. I think there was a reason he was in jail. And it's not because he got in trouble. I hear those stories a lot. And people, they lost their land over a grocery bill, over, like $30 or $60 grocery bill, or they're making a purchase and they sign their signature or their X and thumbprint, and they've actually just sold their land. They thought they were leasing their land. This happened over and over and over. And it was quite a scam. And it just seemed to be the way business was conducted.
And go.
Yes. Well, I just like to make it clear, I don't call this genealogy. I already knew who my people were. This is an investigation, what LHRI does. We're investigating these allotment crimes and looking for Native scholars to kind of, jump in here where they can and help out and move this forward. it's an integral part. It was a pivotal part of our Muskogee history, where a lot of damage had been done to that point, but now we're losing our language and our culture. And they're like, here, you're going to live like colonized people. And as they're forced to do this, now all those opportunities are being stolen to where they have absolutely nothing. Yeah, pretty important part of history that's overlooked.
And as you were talking, I know even it, through this work and this research and dealing with allotment crimes in particular, obviously, me and Kelly, I have some genealogist research. I mean, a lot of personal experience on my own family. So that, especially after our son was born, really wanted to look more into that history that, of course, for anyone watching who's maybe unfamiliar, a lot of these histories are not talked about through assimilation and the mistreatment of people who we really talk about different ways that happened, whether that was Indian boarding schools or guardianship. We talk about it all in our series that we are collaborating on, called Stealing Tulsa, that we've published a few different stories on so far. But Kelly and I went down to the library at the Muskogee Creek Nation tribal complex down there in Okmulgee, and we knew that through records that his family had been a part of the Theowathley tribal town, and so we were excited when we went down there and we were looking through the records, to actually find his ancestors on those town records before the allotment era. But talking to Kelly's dad after, we had found out that your relatives had their allotments swindled through that same system of putting Native people in prison and jail, and then not letting them get out until they signed over their land, which obviously, that is crazy to say that obviously there's something seriously wrong with that justice system if the only thing that will get you out of jail is signing over your property to somebody else. So, Cal, is there, this is a history that your dad really up until recently hasn't talked too terribly much about. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah, pretty quiet in the whole thing. It's interesting having the conversations and digging farther into it. Our background growing up was never really discussed at large. It was more, you're native, this is the tribe you are, and we, to be PC here, we were done a disservice early on. I'll be very careful on how I say things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then there was no real speaking of kind of the where we came from, the heritage. I knew some deeds, some things that had happened, and kind of how the upbringing was, but it was very, very quiet, and it was on purpose due to my father's background, the way he was brought up, and just kind of how my family was back in the day, how they were treated.
And I know that I talked with him from like a research standpoint of, just kind of passing on information to our son, making sure that the histories, that what he does know isn't lost. And, going back to Alice, that your great grandmother that we had on the screen, was one of the main figures that raised him as a child, and she forbade anyone to speak that language, that Creek language in the house. Really was full assimilate, forget that Creek culture that was so ingrained. And Tatianna, obviously, that also very much in your family history that we've been working, telling those family stories, that generations of your relatives had to go through that forced assimilation, and that, still carries on today.
It does, but it doesn't really take, does it? Because now we have these language revitalization programs. We always knew a little bit of Creek, not enough for conversation, but everybody has that opportunity to learn it. But they most certainly grew up under that duress of, you can't carry on that Creek culture. But you see it as I learn more about my Muskogee culture. I see it in our family, and it's still there. It's just not in the traditional sense that a lot of the Muskogee people got to grow up in. Um, and yeah, I find it interesting, especially when we talk to my mother, and she talks about living in white society, but there's not one day in her life that she's ever claimed to, like, be white. We always heard about, to be proud of being an Indian and that type of thing. So that, I think that feels can be a little bit of an isolation issue when community is important, birds of a feather and all that good stuff. It's good to be able to talk to people that understand and have the same background. Diversity is nice too. It's nice to talk to other people, but when you go home, you kind of like to have same traditions and that type of thing.
Now, we talked. I mean, I'm really glad that you had mentioned just that, as far as it doesn't take, like, people they naturally gravitate to their community, to shared heritage, to their culture, and that isn't something that is easily, if at all, really done away with completely. And so obviously that whole effort, and still to this day, but if we can kind of jump back into that in a second, but it's just harmful. It's just misery, and it's just pain, and it's just crime, and it's not obviously with good reason, and it's from a place of of greed and of wanting to harm, which of course is the whole reason. Many many different layers of whether it is getting allotments to begin with, which was done to destroy that communal environment, that communal upbringing that was such a big part of Native American culture, and force everyone to live apart from each other. But even still, you see these big families will just, like, I don't care. We don't want to live apart from each other. We want to live. And even your mom, with this next story that's coming out on Friday, she lived in a house with 18 people, and she loved it.
Yeah, good memories for her. Yeah. So, like I said, the whole forced assimilation was detrimental, and I can sit here and talk about I don't know my language and my heritage, but I often refer back to my great grandfather Thomas Hickory that I speak about a lot, because he encompassed everything from, I always say, Tugabachi is where our story begins, in Indian Territory, all the way to his death in 1941, and he saw the allotments being dispersed and how they were taken. He knew a lot. And he sits in this house of 18 people who aren't allowed to learn all the things that he knows. And while they can understand him, they can't engage in a real conversation with him. And I think that has to be an extremely lonely
Because he only
feeling.
spoke
He
Creek,
endured
right?
because he only spoke Creek. Now, my mom disagrees with me. She's like, he didn't know how to speak Creek or learn. I think he was trying at one point in the beginning. I think he was trying to learn English. I think I said that backwards. I think he was trying to learn English and trying to write. But after they just kept, at every step he made, just cut him down, take everything he built. I think he refused it, and I don't blame him. I think a lot of the Creeks were like that. Why would they want to learn that language?
Mm-hmm.
Everything he built, they took. They, well, I think they murdered a lot of his family in a very conspicuous ways. And he had to know that.
For sure. And again, anyone who's not familiar with the story of Lucinda Hickory with Thomas Hickory, those were the subjects of our first two stories. We're going to get into those in a couple minutes, but and I'm kind of taking notes because I feel like it is really important. And this is things that I didn't know too. I was familiar with the swindling of the land and the allotment and era, and how, especially here in Tulsa, which is Muskogee Creek land, all of Tulsa was allotted land. But soon Tulsa became the oil capital of the world after, they discovered that all this land that had been allotted to Native Americans here was extremely valuable. And so then systematically came the process of raking all of that back, raking all of the land back, stealing it through the court system with, suspicious deaths, and, through the prisons, all the methods that Tatianna had mentioned before. And so I was familiar a little bit with that, but even learning that how much harder it was, that these people depended on interpreters in court as their lands were being stolen, as they were forced into court, as their loved ones were dying all over the place here in Tulsa. A lot of these people didn't speak English, and so I can't imagine what that had been like. Being given land, then all your family members start dying, then your land's taken away, you're kicked off your land. That is pretty much what we're talking about as far as when we're talking about our work together with this allotment crime, these investigations. But I also did want to talk real quick about our big sponsor that we recently received here. So that is One Fire Associates, and they have stepped up this month with a $1,000 donation to our series, our Stealing Tulsa series.
Oh,
Yes.
dope.
So thank you so much, One Fire Associates, because it is thanks to you that these stories are being told. And really, at this point, other than myself, Kelly, Tatianna, only you. This is a very severely underfunded,
Yeah.
person-supported endeavor right now.
So, and we were funded last year through the Santa Fe National Tobacco Company. And I don't give them enough shout out because I'm busy working. So we appreciate that too.
Well,
yeah. So, it's donations like that, help us get one step more educated.
Well,
So
I certainly hope that you can get that again, because your work is so important and you've done so much. And I know, obviously, there is a lot more that you need to do. But I threw this for One Fire Associates. I was so grateful to open up our campaign page, which we started, and I'll mention that again too, for the month of November, especially Giving Tuesday coming up, to help fund these stories that we're telling. We're telling this year a total of 4 stories. Each of them take between $1,500 and $2,000 to produce. And so you look and market and advertise and make sure people see them. So you're talking about $8,000 for this one project alone. And so we're fundraising this month, and especially Giving Tuesday, to be able to tell these stories and more. But we sent the word out asking for help, and One Fire Associates, as I said, stepped up, made a huge donation. And I was looking at their page to find out who these heroes are. And so I came across their guiding principles. So they basically go into tribal communities throughout the U.S. and even abroad, and work with the community members and the governments there to find solutions and essentially evaluate these communities in different areas and help form solutions to improve the quality of life there. And this on the screen is their guiding principles. And I just thought that they were so incredible that I wanted to share them from One Fire Associates and what they do and the principles that guide them. So they believe youth and families are the local experts in their own community and have important contributions to make the planning, implementation, and evaluation of health programs and services. Data belongs to the community from which it is generated and is returned to communities so that it can be used to promote the health and well-being of its citizens. Intellectual property rights are shared among partners. It takes all of us working together to support community growth. Generosity is important for our wellness and ability to maintain balance. Giving back through capacity building and workforce development is a major focus of all of our projects. Building upon the strengths of the community is more powerful than focusing on the deficits alone. It takes a decade to make change last. Partnerships are built for the long term, and we are all a part of the community and have important contributions to make. And so I absolutely love all of their guiding principles, and it just really kind of flows seamlessly into what we're trying to do here as far as serve our community members, bring this, to light. So thank you again, One Fire Associates, for this very generous donation. And again, it's just, it's so important to tell these stories of allotment crimes and what happened here in Tulsa, because a lot of people are still suffering from that generational trauma that's passed down. Like it didn't end, when the allotment era and assimilation era ended back,
Yeah.
I think it says in the 1930s is when it ended. That stuff is passed on year after year after year. And even, that's still happening today. Correct, Tatiana? Would you agree that?
It is still happening today. The restricted land issues are a problem. When I set up an event, I will hear news stories of the past and current stories right now. Um, and they all trouble me. But I see, as far as getting ahead in life, when you've had everything stolen, but you might have a little bit of land left and you save your money so you can get a law attorney, and the law attorneys tend to be able to get nothing done. And I don't know why that is. So you save your money again and try it again. It's like that money, we've been funding attorneys. Indians have been funding attorneys for years and years and years. I know our family has. Um, and what was that other one that really troubled me? But yeah, and with the nations, I think we had the Curtis Act. When the allotments were dispersed, we had the Curtis Act that crippled tribal government. So there's really nothing in place for the land
Mm-hmm.
issues. So that's something else we need to start pushing to the tribes to set up a more resource, because it's expensive. It's expensive to take care of these land issues, and to have land that you can absolutely do nothing with that's not okay. The whole surviving, we have to be able to thrive on this land. As I've said many times, my mother's land that came from her mother, Luwina Hickory Sunday, who I talk about a lot, she's been on twice. She's 83 years old, and she's only been able to get on it twice. And it's suspected that they have side drilled all the minerals off of it, and they've used it, and they pay them nothing for it. So that's a problematic. This is our story. That's not everybody else's stories and all the other stories I hear. And I think restricted land needs to start being viewed differently, more of a historical, it needs to be respected more. We had talked about the squatters' rights. I don't know how all that works. I just know that when someone comes to my table and talks about elders who still have their 160 acres, but they've got some strangers on the other side of that 160 acres making a home, and once you stayed there for so many years, you get to claim
Mm-hmm.
that. And you're doing this to old people. Yeah, all those things have to be looked at and rectified somehow. They got to stop stealing native land. Well, yeah. Since we're talking in today's
Mm-hmm.
terms, because once upon a time we didn't own land. It belonged to the creator and we used it, which worked out well for everybody. And now, you know, you got to buy it. You can't even have a drink of water without paying for it. Yeah.
Well, I want to bring up, of course, this series that we have been working on. It's called as we've said, Stealing Tulsa, this investigative series from VNN and LHRI. Now, we've done 2 stories so far. The story, of course, of Lucinda Hickory, the namesake of the Research Institute. And then we've also done one about Thomas Hickory. And so as Tatianna is talking about these land issues, which again, really didn't even dive into until this 3rd story that we're working on, which was news to me, someone who's been working in this space, diligently for the last few months, that there are still allotment issues today. Like, these problems have not worked out. These issues have not been decided. There's still people like Tatianna's mother, Sally, who are fighting for their land and to get access to that. And, I interviewed her for this next story that's coming out on Friday. And she had said that she now has to make plans for try to figure out what's going to happen when she's no longer with us, because she doesn't feel like it's even something that's going to be decided in her lifetime.
Yeah, and I know she used to say she wants to give it back to the nation, and ask that they build some home for, elder Muskogees. I'm like, Mom, look around. Your daughters are elder Muskogee. We got to get the land. The land belongs to the family. Historically speaking, that's all we have. And it's not a lot of acres. A lot of my cousins' parents had to sell their share of the land, so they don't even have that. And now I think out of a total of the family members that I have studied, we had 1,280 acres. And today I think there might be 11 acres that we can't even use or touch. That's ridiculous. But we have 11 acres. Some people don't even have that.
That's true.
You got to look on the bright side.
Well, I do want to take a moment, as I've mentioned a couple of times, for this series, we are fundraising this month to be able to continue to tell these stories, to be able to continue doing this research. If you want to donate to help tell these stories, up on the screen throughout this program, all you have to do is text Tulsa, the original spelling, 202-858-1233 to donate. There's also the link in the About section of this streaming event on YouTube. It's all over our Facebook, our other social media channels. The links are embedded in these articles, as I mentioned. And so all of, they are tax deductible for this investigative series this month, thanks to a partnership with the local media foundation. And if you wanted to donate specifically to the Lucinda Hickory Research Institute, you're also encouraged to do that. We send out those links with all of our contact information as well, in regards to this series. And it is, those links are embedded in all of our stories as well. And I did want to take, we've mentioned it here and again, obviously with Untold Stories, they're not funded. There is a very big chance, especially as Tatianna continues to do this work without a lot of help, that, there's a big risk that these stories will not be told and that they will just die as people die. And that, to me, is a terrible feeling, knowing that that the history is right here within our grasp to share and make known after so many years of allotment era crime going unreported and not talked about, that there's a chance that it could never be. And we've also talked about this, Tatianna, as far as, there's a lot of talk about Killers of the Flower Moon. The book,
Yeah.
the movie was filmed earlier this year in Oklahoma. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, they were all here filming. It's very well known. But those Osage murders came, I want to say it was 10, 20 years after the deaths and the crimes committed here in Tulsa. And Tatianna has a theory on that.
Oh, I do believe that, speaking specifically, Muskogee Nation was the blueprint, because within the first 10 to 20 years, we lost 80 to 90% of native land was in the hands of non-natives. And like I said, when we get into the investigating, when you see the number of young Native men that went to prison and all the mysterious death, you can just see allotment after allotment. This one died, and then the land goes and the land goes. Yeah, you just have to ask yourself, by the 1920s, the settlers were so bold because nobody really investigated the death of an Indian. Not all of them anyway. I guess they felt they could just you get away with murder, for lack of better words,
Definitely.
because they did for years. You know, they say that it was cheaper to assimilate the Indians than to murder them all, which is one reason why we had to do that. And when you talk about the stories, we do have a responsibility to our ancestors. When you think about a person that had to live a life like that, it's not that they didn't make the best of it. It's not like they probably didn't have happy times. But to me, that was a tough life, and to have something taken from you. If you've ever had anything stolen, if you ever had your milk money stolen or anything stolen, that's painful. And then to have pretty much everything you own taken from you, I think that's a tough life. And we have a responsibility to them to tell their story and to get some sort of justice. Uh, reparations are nice. I think it depends on what day you catch me. Some days I'm like, yes, we want our money back. I think Tulsa County is very responsible in what happened. And then other days it's like, let's just get justice in the court of public opinion and get some sort of understanding of what happened to our ancestors. And if you have generational wealth in Oklahoma, and you're not a native, I'd ask myself, how did my people get that? I would ask myself that. And then one of the next things I'm doing is out of Tulsa, and in newspaper articles, when somebody brings me their family story, and I do a quick search through newspapers.com and this and that, and it's amazing what I find. And my question is, why was the Warren Oil Corporation, which is today the big Warren Medical Facility, why was the Warren Oil Corporation suing a bunch of Indians on their own land? And what they do is they take one native person and their allotment, and they use them to what would you call as the person they're representing, and then they sue all these Indians on their own land. So I have no
And
idea
that was
why.
recent,
Is it a
right?
simple?
That was not.
That's recent. I haven't made it. That's way down in Okemah. I haven't made it down there to find out, was it just right away easements, or was there something more to it? One of the descendants has his own story that I think he's going to share with us, Brittany. I don't know if we've decided on that. And if I remember correctly, it happened in the 50s. A 15-year-old, how'd they swindle a 15-year-old out of their land? Why is anything signed by a 15-year-old even a legal transaction?
And you mentioned that too, as speaking about children, that, other records that you've talked about, which really stuck with me, was that you'd have babies suing their parents. Babies in court, like during allotment times, like young children suing their parents. Obviously, my 3-year-old wouldn't sue me in court saying like, that's my land, or, I want that, property, so there's a lot of sketchy stuff, particularly involving kids.
And the first time you document like that, you're like, wait a minute, I'm a little confused. It looks like that the parents are on this side of the case and the kids are here. And yeah, that's what they did. They just found Native people that, to the guardians and attorneys to make their case, or that they could use to make their case.
I want to
It's
Well, I
Go
want to
ahead.
also touch on the aspect of, the generational wealth that's passed on, like people who inherit these mansions and people who have these like great way of life. And, it's hard not to get political in Oklahoma when we do have, as you mentioned, a governor who works against Oklahoma's tribes at as much as possible. Well, we have a lot of governments, see fall into step, and we have, this law, these school bills that ban critical race theory, which is essentially teaching topics historical topics or anything that makes white people or white kids like feel uncomfortable about being white. And then you have the argument that's, well, this wasn't my, like, I didn't do this, this is not my crimes that were committed. I'm just happen to be like benefiting from it. And that draws to me, the question of, okay, you maybe not committed the crime, but you know that it happened and you're benefiting from it. So what are you doing for it? Like, what are you doing to solve this problem? What are you doing to address this problem? There's organizations like yours that they could be like, this, I am benefiting from this. I am rich because of what happened in Tulsa only less than 100 years ago. Maybe I'll make a donation every month to LHRI to kind of make my own personal amends. Like, I am doing something, as opposed to be like, oh, not my crime, not my problem kind of deal. So I thought that was interesting to bring up, that a lot of people will just say, that's not my issue, and I, have nothing to say about it.
It is uncomfortable, I'm sure. We always say we're not, even though, like I said, 31st and Lewis, that was my great grandmother's land. That would have been our foundation for everybody in our family. But now, very wealthy people, they were displaced for that wealthy neighborhood. It's not our point to displace other people from their homes. What sense would that make? At some point, things have to be right. But yeah, to be a little bit more understanding of what happened, you're right. The generational wealth people help us out because it's, even though you don't know the details, we all knew something happened. The generational trauma does pass on, and education, and knowing what happened helps the healing process, to understand maybe exactly why our elders were this way and why I don't have this. And, I'm working hard, but I can't just, whatever the situation is, the donations would be, yeah, that's what nonprofits live off of. And we have more stories to tell. I can't turn a page in a new abstract without thinking, what is going on here? It's going to take a lot of resource and a lot more people than just, a couple of us.
And I did want to also kind of take a moment to, again, thank Mr. Kelly Tidwell up there. So he is not the forward-facing component of our news organization, but I am grateful that I was able to convince him to come on here, because not only does he lend a lot of the business side to how we're able to tell Indigenous news, allotment crime stories, other stories from the Native American perspective, which is very, as he said, absent. Our network would not exist for the last 4 years without his support, without having me, supporting us and our family, so that we can tell more of these stories, but which are a lot, again, to circle back, a lot of volunteer work. And my, kindred spirit over there, Tatianna, knows how many volunteer hours go in to efforts like these when we're not receiving, eventually we might have to quit. But for right now, we keep going just because, it's so needed. And so again, Tatianna, I really appreciate you too, all of your research and working with us, and the countless hours that you have spent with working on this series too.
Yeah, well, I appreciate Verified News and doing this series with us and all the work you put into it, because Brittany just grabs something and runs with it, and it's like, where are you going? I'll be right back. And there's a finished product. I appreciate that. So
I did want to throw up one more time the way that you can give. I'm going to show our campaign page right here. We have 2 donations so far towards our $2,000 goal. Our big fundraiser is on Giving Tuesday, which is kind of funny to me, because Giving Tuesday is on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, after you've spent so much on food, after Black Friday, after you spend so much shopping. It's like, if you have any money left over to donate to, an organization or a project, please, we ask everything that you donate to LHRI is tax deductible, but especially through this Giving Tuesday, Stealing Tulsa News Fund. This is tax deductible, and we are trying to raise $2,000 so that we can tell more stories throughout the end of the year and even into the new year. We really cannot do it without the community's support, and kind of just revisiting as far as um, Tatianna, you have a lot of community feedback, right? Like a lot of community, appreciation, but just hasn't necessarily translated into support of your work.
It is, and it's why it is when I'm ready to just be like, I don't know if I can do it anymore, and then somebody gives me, their story, or please don't stop doing this. It is harder to walk away than to quit. I can tell you that. Did that make sense when I
Yeah,
said it?
yeah. It's, people
So
have a way of doing that.
yeah, and I do get the moral support. I've gotten decent moral support from the Muskogee Nation, no funding from them, but I'm not giving them a proper presentation either. So, and then, I mean, I don't know if you were gonna say this, at the end of the year, because I don't want to forget my elder ancestor Tugabachi, you're gonna be doing a segment on him,
Yes,
right?
and that it's interesting because that is the most, well known, I would say,
Mhm.
in the public sense of Dugabachi was this really revered community leader that his allotment is now, he lived to be over 100 years old, which kind of works in the argument of a lot of people in your family would live very old to a very old age if they were allowed to live, especially like your ancestors that, all just started dying really young when they were forced into assimilated society. But his Tugabachi's allotment is where the gathering place is now, and so that will be an interesting story coming out next month. That the gathering place here in Tulsa, uh, world class park. No mention of the allotment that it used to, or that the allotted land that it was built on, or any of that heritage at all. And so that, yes, that definitely is going to be coming next month. But Tatiana, I did want to um, give you a minute before we wrap up here. That obviously, um, if people want to donate specifically to Lucinda Hickory Research Institute, your website is attached to all of our articles and our links in the campaigns
Yeah.
that we send out. But are there any other ways that people can help you get involved in your research and what you're doing other than just coming at you with more ideas?
You want more work to
Yeah.
do? Yeah. So I definitely need native scholars. I like all the native stories, or even people like boots on the ground people who want to help the research or put together events. Um, we need people like that. And I have to have my native scholars because this has to be told from an Indian point of view. It's different. It's different if it comes from anyone else, because non-natives have been telling our stories forever. And the native scholars, we need them to disseminate the information and put the credentials on it and that type of thing. So I am looking for that to be able to work with me. I need, yeah, yeah. And yes, you can donate through my website. And if you want to do it before Giving Tuesday, we will take it. No need to wait, as far as I'm
That's
concerned.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I wanted to say thank you to both of you. Kelly, is there any final words that you wanted to depart here before we log off on our live stream event today?
Looking forward for more for continued partnerships along with both Tatianna as well as other native-owned companies. It's a big thing. I think we should support each other for sure, as well as like the Irish background, all the folks that have helped us from that angle as well. So just everyone we partner with, it's looking forward to more opportunities.
Thank you. Tatianna, any last words?
no, Kelly's right. The partnerships are important. We've had partnerships with we work with Philbrook, we work with the Tulsa County Library. I don't want to leave anybody out. I wasn't really prepared, but those really help a lot and getting the word out there. So I appreciate the work that both of you have done and verified news. So Mado. And
All right, well, thank you again, both of you. Thank you, everyone that's watching, whether it's here in Oklahoma, other parts of the United States, over across the pond in Ireland. We hope that you are intrigued with this allotment crime research, with these untold stories, with the work that our organizations are doing. And as always, let us know if there is any questions that you have. And of course, we would appreciate all of the support that we can get as we continue to try to do this work that is not only under supported, but has people actively working against even still to this day. So please consider giving this Giving Tuesday, reading our stories, sharing our stories, and just being a part of what we're trying to do here in Oklahoma and beyond. Hope you guys will follow along, subscribe on our YouTube channel, subscribe to our news and updates, follow us on social media, and if you're new to our verified news community, welcome. We have a lot more news, information, and untold stories coming up. So, adios. You guys just hang on for a second.